Hello, everybody. My name is Graham Elwood, and you are watching the Political Vigilante. Boom. One of the great ways to support the show is go to patreon.com/Graham Elwood, where you can submit articles and topics like this. And this is a pretty cool one because it's kind of a historical thing. It was submitted by Terry T. Terry, thank you so much for supporting us. America's first black war correspondent reported from the Civil War's front lines. This is written by Pharrell Evans and History.com, February 15th, 1922. So I'm just going to read what the excerpt that was sent to me because it's just pretty interesting. Just kind of read it straightforward. Thomas Morris Chester, whose mother had escaped slavery, covered the final year of the war for a white-owned newspaper. During the Civil War, hundreds of reporters from Union and Confederate newspapers published stories from battles on land and sea. Only one of those reporters was a black man, Thomas Morris Chester, the nation's first African-American war correspondent. The invention of the telegraph in 1944 by Samuel Morse had made it possible for newspapers to turn out editions in a matter of hours, quickly spreading news around the country. So this is just to give you sort of a historical context. Prior to the telegraph, this is where also the term Morse code, as Samuel Morse invented it. There was no way to get, it took like forever to get stories to move around. So with the telegraph, then you could this happened in this part of the country and so other parts of the country were getting stories at a much quicker rate than they were, right? The correspondents filling those frontline stories and shaping Americans' perceptions about the war were mostly white men recording the conflict primarily through the lens of other white men and their families. Theirs were the only perspectives conveyed in the mainstream press until the white-owned Philadelphia Press hired Chester in 1864 to cover the black troops in Virginia. Writing under the pseudonym Roland, the 30-year-old Harrisburg, Pennsylvania native whose mother had escaped slavery became the first and only African-American correspondent during the war for a major newspaper, embedded with the United States colored troops in the Army of the James from August 1864 until June 1865. Dang, that guy was in it. Chester, who had recruited black men to the Union Army, gave voice and dignity to the black soldiers struggling for the right to fight for parity with white troops, and for the right to be treated with respect due to men willing to lay down their lives for their country. Writing in the Philadelphia Press, Chester said of black troops, every man looked like a soldier, while inflexible determination depicted upon every countenance. Wow. Chester gave voice to the black soldiers of the American Army of the James, formed in April 1864 to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The Army of James contained 2 divisions of white troops of the 24th Corps and 1 division of black troops of the 25th, which consisted of 2 brigades containing 5,000 men from 7 regiments. Chester, who embedded with the 25th on the front lines, didn't shy away from describing the carnage these soldiers experienced, as in this description of 2 pickets that had been shelled. Quivering pieces of flesh indicated the locality of the frightful scene, while fragments of the hearts and intestines were hanging upon the branches of the neighboring trees. Jesus. When a war correspondent talks that honestly, it shows regular people who've never seen war how awful it is. Which is why starting after the Vietnam War, and with the corporate media taking over all media, including Hollywood in the 80s, that's when war started to get sanitized. The first Gulf War in 1991. And then, of course, Iraq, Afghanistan. Why we don't even talk about Yemen. We show all the awful stuff that Russia is doing in Ukraine, but we don't show any of the awful stuff that America is doing in Yemen, or stuff we've done in Iraq or Syria or any of the other countries. See how they sanitize? Because when regular people really see how awful war is, they're like, we don't want it. It's awful. We don't want war. I'm just giving you some historical context here. On April 3rd, 1865, the black troops of the 25th Corps were among the first Union soldiers to enter the Confederate capital, signaling the war's imminent conclusion. For the Philadelphia Press, Chester wrote, when Union infantrymen entered Richmond, the citizens stood gaping in wonder at the splendidly equipped army marching along under the graceful folds of the old flag. The pious old Negroes, male and female, indulged in such expressions. You've come at last. We've been looking for you these many days. Jesus has opened the way. Unlike other war correspondents, Chester refrained from quoting his black sources in dialect. Wow. Yeah, and the whites, I'm sure the white correspondents didn't talk about the black people being like, thank God you're here. The soldiers, black and white, he wrote, received these assurances of loyalty as evidence of the latent patriotism of the oppressed people, which a military despotism has not been able to crush. Lieutenant Robert Verplanck, a white officer who trained the black troops, called Chester our own correspondent in one of his letters. Chester also knew how to frame the plight of all black people in the context of the war and the troops fighting for their freedom. Between the Negroes and the enemy, it is a war to the death, he wrote on August 22nd, 1864. The colored troops have cheerfully accepted the conditions of the Confederate government, that between them no quarter is to be shown. Those here have not the least idea of living after they fall into the hands of the enemy. So they knew that. The white Union soldiers were like, if I get captured, they're probably just going to put me, in the stockade or the brig or whatever. They're just going to hold me as a prisoner of war. The black soldiers knew there's no capture here. There's no spend the rest of the war in jail and hope that we get released after we win. It's you're dead. They're going to kill you. They're going to hang you. They're going to kill you. Many black prisoners of war received harsh treatment from the rebels, some tortured, some killed, and others sold into slavery. African-American Civil War soldiers convalescing at Atkins Landing. That's the reference. A day after entering Richmond with the army of James, Chester sat down the speaker's chair at the Virginia State Capitol building, a symbol of Confederate power. According to his biographer, R.J.M. Blackett, Chester was well aware of the irony and eager to thumb his nose at the Confederacy. Datelining his story, Hall of Congress, Richmond, 1865, Chester began it this way. Seated in the speaker's chair, so long dedicated to treason, but in the future to be consecrated to loyalty, I hasten to give a rapid sketch of the incidents which have occurred since my last dispatch. A paroled Confederate soldier saw Chester seated in the speaker's chair and called out, "Come out of there, you black cuss." For once, Chester became the focus of the news as a fellow. We don't hear about that. They should make a movie about this cat. You know what I'm saying? And how the Union considered the Confederate as traitors, treason. They were going against the Constitution of the United States of America, which is why anybody holding the Confederate flag today, you're a traitor. It's part of our history. Well, it's the history of a losing army that wanted to defeat the United States of America. So you can't wave the American flag and the Confederate flag. You're a traitor to the United States of America, as was stated by a war correspondent back during the war. It was treason what you did. And it was just done for money.